They said I was being dramatic. Have you ever been told that? When someone's trying to erase you from their life and everyone just looks the other way? I'm sitting here now, months later, and I still can't believe what happened that night, what I found out, what she tried to do to me. But let me start where it really began. In that oak-paneled study, surrounded by oil paintings of dead Ellingtons, watching Cyrus's new wife raise her glass like she owned the world. The memorial dinner. God, what a joke that was. I shouldn't have gone. My hands were shaking as I walked up those marble steps, the same steps I used to climb every Christmas, every anniversary, back when this place was, well, back when I belonged here. Now I was just the ex-wife, tolerated for appearances. Isolde sat at the head of the table like some kind of queen, perfectly styled blonde hair, not a strand out of place. 43 years old and already acting like she'd been mistress of this house for decades instead of just 2 years. I took my seat at the far end. The message was clear. The other guests, Cyrus's cousins, a few business associates, people who used to smile at me at charity galas, they all avoided my eyes. Like grief was contagious. Like failure might rub off. "To my beloved Cyrus," Isolde said, her voice honey-sweet, but cold as winter, "who taught us all about letting go of the past." She was looking right at me when she said it. I lifted my glass because what else could I do? My wedding ring had been gone for 3 years, but I still caught myself twisting the empty space where it used to sit. Old habits. "It's time you let go of the past, Celine," she continued, and now the whole table was watching. "Cyrus's life with me is all that matters now." The words hit like a slap. I set my wineglass down too hard. The crystal rang against the mahogany, sharp and brittle, just like me, apparently. My sleeve shifted when I reached for my napkin, and I caught Thaddeus, Cyrus's cousin, staring at the bruise on my wrist. Dark purple, finger-shaped. I pulled my sleeve down quickly, but the damage was done. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. That bruise? That's a whole other story. One I'm still not ready to tell. Anyway, where was I? The table fell silent. Forks frozen halfway to mouths. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its breath. "You don't get to erase me," I whispered. It came out before I could stop it, barely audible, but somehow everyone heard. Isolde's perfect smile faltered, just for a second, but I saw it. Then dessert came, some elaborate chocolate thing that probably cost more than most people's rent. I couldn't taste it. My throat felt like sandpaper. That's when she did it. Isolde reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Thick cream paper, the expensive kind. She slid it across the polished table toward me, her manicured nails clicking against the wood. "Read it when you're alone," she said, her voice smooth as silk. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I turned it over in my hands, and my heart stopped. Cyrus's handwriting. Those familiar loops and flourishes I'd seen on birthday cards, shopping lists, love letters from another lifetime. But this was different, urgent, like he'd been in a hurry. My fingers trembled as I clutched the envelope. The murmurs around the table grew louder, whispers about poor Celine and how awkward, and someone should say something. But no one did. I shoved the envelope into my purse, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Isolde was watching me with those cold blue eyes, and for the first time since Cyrus died, she looked satisfied. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. Like she knew exactly what was in that envelope. And like she knew It was going to destroy me. If you're still with me after hearing that, hit subscribe and drop your city below. I'm reading every single comment, and knowing there are people like you out there, people who get it, honestly keeps me going. It feels like having a friend sitting across from me, listening to this mess unfold. Let me send some love back to wherever you are. I need that right now. I left that dinner with more questions than answers. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Cyrus had left me something Isolde was desperate to keep hidden, something that would change everything. I drove home in silence that night. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, not from the wine, but from that envelope burning a hole in my purse, like some kind of, I don't know, like a bomb waiting to go off. You know that feeling when you know something's about to change your life? When you're standing at the edge of a cliff and you can't see the bottom? Yeah, that. My kitchen felt different when I walked in. Too quiet. The envelope sat on my counter like an accusation, cream-colored and heavy. I must have circled around it 6 times, making tea, straightening dish towels, anything to avoid Cyrus's handwriting. God, I'd recognize those loops anywhere. He used to leave me little notes on my coffee mug, stuck to the bathroom mirror. Don't forget to smile today. You're beautiful when you're concentrating. Stupid romantic stuff that made me feel like I mattered. This wasn't that kind of note. I sat there for 20 minutes just staring at it. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my ribs. What could he possibly have left for me? We'd been divorced for 3 years. Clean break, they call it. Ha! On the kitchen table was a plain, unopened envelope. I didn't even look at it that night. Wait, no, that's not right. I'm getting confused. There were 2 envelopes, see? The one from Isolde, and then, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, where was I? The phone rang. Startled me so bad I knocked over my tea. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Breathing. Just breathing on the other end. Heavy, deliberate, like someone wanted me to know they were there. Hello? I said again, my voice smaller this time. The line went dead. I checked my locks twice that night. Front door, back door, windows. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I turned each deadbolt. The clicking sound echoed through the house like gunshots. But that wasn't even the worst part. The next morning, I had errands. Normal things. Groceries, post office, trying to pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I stopped by the bank to make a routine payment. Same teller I'd been seeing for years, sweet girl named Maria. She pulled up my account, and her face changed. Strange, she muttered, frowning at her screen. Your account shows a recent status flag. My stomach dropped. What kind of flag? Oh, she looked flustered, offered me this nervous smile that didn't reach her eyes. Apologies, must be a system error. These computers, you know how they are. But I saw how her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, how she glanced toward the manager's office. System error. My ass. I walked out of there feeling like everyone was watching me, like I had some invisible target painted on my back.
Which is why when I got home and saw the envelope still sitting there, unopened, I finally grew some backbone and tore it open. Inside wasn't a full letter, just a fragment. One photocopied page, half the text cropped out like someone had deliberately hidden part of it. The paper was warm in my hands, slightly damp from my sweating palms. What I could read made my heart race. Beneficiary allocation contingent upon dissolution of prior union. And there, clear as day, Cyrus's name and mine, Celine Hartwell, my maiden name, the one I'd taken back after the divorce. I read it 3 times, 4, 5. The words started blurring together, but the meaning was clear enough to make my head spin. Did Cyrus leave me something? Some kind of, what, insurance policy? Investment account? Or was this some sick game Isolde was playing? I spread the fragment out on my kitchen table next to a half-eaten sandwich. The legal language was dense, confusing. Beneficiary allocation. What the hell did that even mean? My mind was racing, trying to connect dots that might not even exist. Why would Isolde give me this? Why now? If Cyrus had left me money, wouldn't I have known about it? Unless... The doorbell rang. I froze. It was past 9 p.m. Who visits at 9 p.m.? I crept to the front window, pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out. Empty driveway, empty street. The porch light cast everything in yellow shadows. No one there. But on my doorstep, another envelope. Plain, manila, no markings. My hands shook as I opened it, still standing in my doorway in my slippers and bathrobe like some paranoid old woman. Inside, a photograph. Black and white, grainy like it was taken from far away, of me. Outside Cyrus's estate, from earlier that week, I was getting out of my car, purse slung over my shoulder, looking tired and small. The angle was from across the street, maybe from a parked car. Someone had been watching, waiting, taking pictures. Someone knew I'd been to the memorial dinner. Someone knew I had the envelope. I slammed the door and turned every lock, my heart hammering against my ribs. The photograph fluttered to the floor, my face staring back at me, in grainy black and white. 2 envelopes now, one cryptic, one threatening, and both pointing to the same terrible truth. I was being pulled into a game I didn't understand by people I couldn't see. But what I didn't know was about to make it worse.
I didn't sleep that night, not even close. I kept thinking about that photograph, my face in grainy black and white, caught like some kind of criminal, the envelope with Cyrus's handwriting, the bank flag that Maria tried to brush off as a system error. None of it made sense. All of it terrified me. By morning, I had made a decision. I was done pretending this would go away on its own. I called Marcellus Crane. Marcellus had been Cyrus's attorney for 15 years. Handled our divorce, actually. Smart man, old school type who wore suspenders and kept hard candy in a crystal bowl on his desk. If anyone could make sense of that legal fragment, it would be him. His office still smelled like leather and old money when I walked in. Same burgundy chairs, same mahogany bookshelves lined with law books that probably cost more than my car. But something felt different this time. I wasn't the grieving ex-wife anymore. I was, what? A woman with questions that needed answers. My hands trembled when I set down the photocopy on his desk. Marcellus adjusted his glasses, the thick, wire-rimmed kind that made him look like a scholarly owl, and frowned at the document. His fingers were gnarled with arthritis, but they moved carefully over the paper like he was reading Braille. "Where did you get this?" His voice carried weight. Not suspicion exactly. Alarm. "Does it matter?" "Celine." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "This isn't the final draft I reviewed. Cyrus made revisions in his last months, but the final will circulated only to a small circle." My breath caught. "So it's real? My name is actually on something?" He didn't give me a simple yes. Lawyers never do they? Instead, he steepled his fingers and chose his words like picking stones from a riverbed. "The page has Cyrus's hand, yes, but the context is missing. This fragment alone can be dangerous. It invites claim and counterclaim without the rest of the document. Dangerous. There was that word again. What kind of dangerous? The kind where people get hurt, Celine. Financially, legally, sometimes worse. I lowered myself into the chair, my joints aching. 58 isn't old, but some days it feels ancient, especially when you're sitting in your dead ex-husband's lawyer's office holding a piece of paper that might change everything, or might get you killed. Looking back, I should have seen it.
I left Marcellus's office with more questions and answers, but at least now I knew I wasn't losing my mind. The document was real. My name was real. Whatever game was being played, I was apparently a player whether I wanted to be or not. The elevator in his building was one of those old brass ones with the cage door. As I waited, I heard voices drifting from a conference room down the hall. The door was cracked open just enough for sound to slip through. "She has it. No delays. Do you hear me?" The voice was sharp, practiced, clinical, like a surgeon giving orders. I couldn't see who was speaking, but something about the tone made my skin crawl. The brittle urgency, the assumption of obedience. I'd heard that voice before. The elevator arrived with a ding, and I stepped inside on shaking legs. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of expensive shoes through the conference room crack. Heels, designer heels that clicked like weapons on marble floors. But what I didn't know then, there was one thing I'd missed. The bank was my next stop. If my name was flagged in their system, I wanted to know why. And if Cyrus had left me something, anything, I needed to find out what. The private accounts office was quieter in the late afternoon. Fewer customers, more attention from the staff. I asked specifically for the manager this time, not some flustered teller who'd apologize for system errors. Margaret Coleman had been managing accounts at First National for 20 years. Gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of woman who'd seen every financial scandal and family drama this city had to offer. I slid the photocopy across her desk along with my driver's license. "I need to know if my name appears on any accounts tied to the Cyrus Ellington estate." She studied the document, then typed something into her computer. Her face went very still. "Mrs. Hartwell, your name does appear on an account tied to the estate. Access is restricted pending final review." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only did my name appear, it was recognized, legal, official. This wasn't rumor or speculation anymore. This was real money, real assets, real legal standing. What kind of account? Margaret glanced toward the door, then leaned forward slightly. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "A trust account. Substantial. But I can't release details without proper documentation. Court orders, final will, that sort of thing." She handed me a stamped slip, official bank letterhead confirming my inquiry. Proof that I wasn't imagining things.
Mrs. Hartwell, be careful. When substantial money is involved, people, well, people do things they wouldn't normally do. I walked out of there feeling like I'd crossed some invisible line. What started as humiliation at a memorial dinner had become something else entirely. I had legal standing, real financial stakes, and someone was already trying to stop me. The sidewalk outside the bank felt different. More eyes, more shadows. A black sedan idled at the curb longer than normal traffic patterns would explain. The window rolled down an inch, then closed. The car pulled away moments later, but the message was clear. You're being watched. Then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I got the point, I heard it again. That voice from the conference room, drifting down from an office window above. Proceed faster. 2 words. Clipped. Urgent. Close enough to make my blood run cold. I clutched my purse like the stamped paper inside was a lifeline. Maybe it was. The discovery at the bank had changed everything. What began as confusion was now a battle over real money, real inheritance, real power. And by walking into that bank, by asking those questions, I'd painted a target on my back. But that wasn't even the worst part. If you're still here, tap like. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. As I walked to my car, I realized the game had shifted. I wasn't just some bitter ex-wife anymore. I was a legitimate threat to whatever plan Isolde had been executing. And threats, as I was about to learn, have a way of getting eliminated. 2 nights later, the invitation arrived. Hand-delivered, cream cardstock, gold embossing. Family remembrance dinner at the Ellington estate. As if we were all one big happy family and not vultures circling a corpse. I should have thrown it away. Should have stayed home with a bottle of wine and some bad television. But something in me, pride, stupidity, call it what you want, wouldn't let Isolde win by default. So I put on my best black dress and drove back to that house of ghosts. The chandeliers were blazing when I arrived, every crystal catching light like tiny accusations. The dining room table stretched endlessly under polished silver and fine china. Everything perfect, everything cold. I kept my purse close, the bank-stamped confirmation tucked inside like a secret weapon. But I didn't plan to use it. Not yet. Let them think I was still the broken ex-wife, stumbling around in the dark. Isolde sat at the head of the table in a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than my mortgage. She looked like a queen holding court, and maybe that's exactly what she was. "Celine," she said, her voice honeyed poison. "So glad you could join us." The other faces around the table, Cyrus's cousins, a few business associates, people who used to nod politely at charity events, they all watched me like I was some fascinating specimen. The crazy ex-wife, the woman who couldn't let go. If only they knew. Conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Stock portfolios, vacation plans, whose daughter got into which Ivy League school. Normal rich people problems. I cut my lamb and smiled at the right moments and pretended my heart wasn't hammering against my ribs. Then Isolde raised her wine glass. "It's strange," she said, and her voice carried just enough to make everyone stop talking. "How people cling to scraps of the past instead of accepting what's settled." Every eye turned toward me. Subtle. Testing. The phrase was too deliberate, too pointed. Scraps of the past. Like that photocopied will fragment burning a hole in my purse. My hands paused mid-cut. The knife felt heavy in my grip. I said carefully, keeping my voice level, that scraps have value when they reveal truths others would rather stay hidden. The silence that followed was deafening. Crystal ring against crystal as someone set down their glass too hard. Fork tines scraped against china like fingernails on a chalkboard. The polite veneer was cracking. Later, during some mindless conversation about the weather, I quietly probed Anton, one of Cyrus's younger cousins. Sweet man. Always been kind to me. I asked casually how often he'd been in contact with the bank lately. Anton's fork froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes darted toward Isolde before he answered. "Haven't spoken to them in months," he said, but his voice was too quick, too bright. "Why would I?" But I remembered seeing his name on correspondence years ago. bank statements, investment updates. His little slip of the eyes tortoise-souled told me everything I needed to know. He was lying. And she knew he was lying. And they both knew I caught it. After dinner, I wandered into the portrait gallery. Needed air, needed space to think. The oil paintings of dead Ellingtons stared down from their gilded frames like judges at a trial. Cyrus's great-grandfather, his father, generations of men who'd built this fortune I was apparently entitled to a piece of. I wasn't alone long. Isolde's heels clicked against the marble with deliberate precision as she joined me. Her perfume, something expensive and cloying, filled the space between us. Playing detective doesn't suit you, Celine. Some doors once opened don't close again. I turned to face her, and for the first time since Cyrus died, I didn't flinch. And some locks once broken can't be replaced. I kept my voice steady, calm. Cyrus knew that. He prepared for it. The words were a gamble. I had proof, yes, but not the whole picture. Still, my tone made it clear I wasn't bluffing anymore. For the first time, Isolde's perfect mask flickered. Not fear, irritation. The kind that comes right before someone strikes back. Be very careful, Celine. You're playing a game you don't understand. Maybe, but I'm learning fast. She smiled then, but it never reached her eyes. I left that dinner feeling like I'd crossed another invisible line. The gloves were off now. Whatever pretense of civility we'd maintained was gone. The next morning proved me right. A letter was hand-delivered to my house. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Zoli's perfect script, the kind they teach in expensive boarding schools. Inside, one sentence. Withdraw your claims, or the past you've hidden will surface. My hands shook as I read it, not just from anger, though God knows there was plenty of that, from fear. She'd been digging into my life, my history, looking for ammunition, and she'd found something she thought could destroy me. The threat was precise, calculated, not vague malice, but a surgeon's blade positioned exactly where it would do the most damage. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that letter for a long time. The morning sun streamed through my windows, birds sang in the oak tree outside. Life went on as normal, while my world tilted on its axis. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about Cyrus or what he left me. This was war. Okay, breathe. Back to the night that changed everything. Because what happened next, what I found hidden in Cyrus's papers, that's when I realized Isolde wasn't just protecting her inheritance. She was hiding something much worse. I woke up to 17 missed calls. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. Voicemails from clients, text messages that make my stomach drop with each one I opened. Sarah Chen, whose kitchen I'd redesigned last spring. Celine, I heard some concerning things about your business practices. We need to talk. Marcus Webb from the Country Club Project. Got an interesting email about you. Is there something I should know about missing funds? Missing funds. Jesus Christ. By the time I'd listened to half the messages, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Isolde hadn't just threatened to dick up my past. She'd already started poisoning my present. 3 more clients called during breakfast, all of them suddenly concerned about my financial integrity. All of them using the same phrases, like you've been reading from a script. She was destroying my reputation one carefully placed whisper at a time. But you know what? I was done being the victim in this story. I got dressed, not the defeated woman in yesterday's wrinkled clothes, but the interior designer who'd built a business from nothing after her divorce. Professional blazer, good shoes, the kind of armor you wear when you're going to war. My first stop was the bank. Again. This time, I didn't ask for the manager. I demanded her. Margaret Coleman looked up from her desk with those sharp gray eyes, and I could see she'd been expecting me. I need to know everything, I said, sliding the will fragment across her polished surface. Not hints, not careful banking language, everything. She studied me for a long moment, probably weighing legal protocols against whatever she saw in my face. Finally, she pulled out a thick folder. There are 3 accounts tied to your name through the Ellington Trust, 2 investment portfolios, and 1 direct inheritance fund. Her voice was quiet, professional. The total value, she paused, glanced at the door, then leaned forward. Just over $2.7 million. The world tilted sideways. 2.7 million. Million with an M. I gripped the edge of her desk to keep from sliding out of my chair. My mouth went dry, then flooded with saliva like I might throw up. That's impossible. Cyrus and I were divorced, clean break. No alimony, no... The trust was established 6 months before his death. All legal, all filed properly with the state. But there's been activity on these accounts. Attempted transfers, requests for documentation changes. Someone's been trying to move the money. Isolde. I can't confirm names without a court order, but the attempts have been aggressive, persistent. I left that bank with papers. Real documentation this time, not fragments. Proof that Cyrus had left me a fortune, and proof that someone was trying to steal it. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I walked to my car, fumbling with the keys because my hands wouldn't stop shaking, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Same one I'd seen before, I was almost certain. A man got out, not threatening with muscles and menace, but scarier somehow. Quiet. Professional. The kind of man who gets paid to solve problems permanently. Ms. Hartwell? His voice was calm, conversational. Walk away from this. You don't want what comes next. Which is what? He smiled. Thin, cold like winter sunlight. People remember things about 1998. About your brother, Danny. About the accident that maybe wasn't so accidental. My blood turned to ice water. Danny, my baby brother, dead at 22 in a car crash that destroyed my parents. The guilt I'd carried for 15 years because we'd fought the night he died. Because I'd called him a screw-up, told him to grow up or get out. The secret I'd buried so deep, I thought no one would ever find it. You don't know anything about my brother. I know he owed money to some very unforgiving people. I know you paid off his debts after the funeral. $43,000 from your savings account. The police report was incomplete. He was right. Danny had been gambling, borrowed from the wrong people, and that night he'd been running scared. I'd given him the money to disappear, to start over somewhere safe. But he never made it out of town. Walk away, Miss Hartwell, or everyone finds out what really happened that night. He got back in the sedan and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with my entire life crumbling around my feet. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all the papers spread across the table like puzzle pieces. The bank documents, proving my inheritance, the will fragment that started it all, the threatening letter from Isolde, and in the middle of it all, a 20-year-old photograph of Danny grinning at the camera with that reckless smile that used to drive me crazy. I almost folded, almost packed everything away and pretended this nightmare had never started. But then I picked up my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Archer Lewin, another lawyer,
one who distanced himself when Isolde married Cyrus, a man with principles, and more importantly, a man who understood what it meant to fight dirty. Archer, it's Celine Hartwell. I need help. And before you say no, you should know they're threatening to destroy me with lies about my dead brother. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then, come to my office tonight and bring everything. I wanted to give up, truly, but something in me wouldn't let go. Maybe it was Danny's memory. Maybe it was the $2.7 million Cyrus had left me for reasons I still didn't understand. Or maybe it was just pure stubborn rage at being pushed around by a woman who thought money could buy her any truth she wanted. Whatever it was, it kept me moving when everything else told me to run. Because here's the thing about bullies. Even rich, powerful, connected bullies. They're used to people backing down. They count on fear and shame to do their work for them. But when you've already lost everything that matters, what else do they have to take? Archer's office was dark when I arrived, just a single lamp burning on his desk. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but his eyes were sharp as he examined my documents. He said, "This is a mess." I know. He said it's also winnable, if you're willing to fight. They threatened my brother's memory. They're destroying my business. What choice do I have? Archer smiled then, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. Then let's give them a war they'll never forget. But what I didn't know was that Isolde had already made her next move. Archer and I sat in his dimly lit office. The evidence spread between us like puzzle pieces that finally made sense. "She's been trying to move the money for months," he said, tapping the banking reports with his pen. "Every legal avenue she could think of. But the trust provisions are ironclad." I stared at the documents. My inheritance, my future, everything Isolde was trying to steal. $2.7 million that I'd never known existed. How do we stop her? Archer leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "We go public. Controlled leak, just enough to start people asking questions." That's when I thought of Verity Klein. I'd met her at charity galas back when Cyrus and I were married. Sharp woman, the kind of journalist who smiled sweetly while digging for secrets. If anyone could turn whispers into headlines, it would be her. The next morning, I called her. "Celine Hartwell," she said, and I could hear the curiosity in her voice. "This is unexpected. I have a story for you about Cyrus Ellington's estate, about questions that haven't been asked yet." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that might make certain people very uncomfortable." We met at a downtown coffee shop, neutral territory. I didn't hand her everything, that would come later, but just enough to spark her interest. "Cyrus's estate isn't as settled as people think," I told her quietly, sliding a single document across the table. "There are discrepancies, financial irregularities that someone's been working very hard to hide." Verity studied the bank statement, her eyes lighting up with that predatory gleam journalists get when they smell scandal. "How deep does this go?" "If you're patient, there will be names you'll want, documents, maybe even criminal charges." I left her with more questions than answers, which was exactly the point. Let her curiosity do the work. The next day, a small item appeared in the society pages. Ellington fortune, unsettled questions surface. Just 3 sentences, nothing specific, but enough to start whispers in the right circles. Enough to let Isolde know her perfect widow act was about to face some very uncomfortable scrutiny. I folded the clipping and tucked it into my purse. My first real victory. But that wasn't even the most important move. Later that week, Archer filed the preliminary probate notice. I sat beside him in the courthouse as the clerk stamped the papers. The sound, sharp and final,
like a judge's gavel. The notice stated plainly, Celine Hartwell intends to contest the Ellington estate distribution. My name was officially back in play. Not as some bitter ex-wife chasing scraps, but as a legitimate claimant with legal standing. I felt my pulse quicken, but this time it wasn't dread. It was adrenaline. For the first time in months, I was the one making moves instead of just reacting to them. The courthouse steps felt different under my feet as we walked out, steadier, like I finally had somewhere solid to stand on. How long before she knows? I asked Archer. She probably already knows. News like this travels fast in legal circles. He was right. That night, my phone rang. The same faceless voice I'd been hearing for weeks. Last chance. Walk away or you'll drown with him. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't the terrified woman cowering in her kitchen. This time, I had power. Tell a soul the tide's already turning and she can't swim. I hung up myself. No trembling hands, no racing heart. Just the cold satisfaction of someone who'd finally found her footing in a fight that had been rigged against her from the start. The caller's shock was palpable in the silence before the line went dead. I sat in my kitchen afterward, staring at the folded newspaper clipping on my counter. 3 sentences that probably cost a soul a few sleepless nights. The probate filing that made me a real threat instead of just a nuisance. For weeks, I'd been playing defense, reacting to her moves, scrambling to understand what was happening to me. But now I was in the game. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. Different number this time. You have no idea what you're dealing with, a woman's voice said. Clipped, professional. Not a sold, but someone who worked for her. Actually, I think I'm starting to figure it out. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. I can't even believe what I found next. If you want to see every piece of this unravel, subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. Because what happened in that courtroom the next week, what I discovered about the real reason Cyrus left me that money, that's when I realized Isolde wasn't just protecting her inheritance. She was covering up something much, much worse. The courthouse that morning felt like walking into battle. My heels clicked against the marble floors, sharp, deliberate sounds that echoed through the hallways like gunshots. I'd chosen my armor carefully. Navy blazer, good shoes, the kind of outfit that said I belonged here, that I wasn't some desperate woman chasing fantasies. Archer walked beside me, his briefcase thick with documents. 3 weeks of preparation had led to this moment. 3 weeks of digging, planning, building a case that could finally expose what Isolde really was. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, high windows letting in streams of dusty sunlight, rows of benches that reminded me of church pews. Fitting, I suppose, since we were here seeking some form of justice. Isolde was already seated at the defendant's table, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. She wore cream-colored silk, expensive, tasteful, the kind of outfit designed to make her look like the grieving widow instead of the predator she really was. She didn't look at me when I entered. That small snub felt like a war cry. The judge called the session to order, and suddenly it was real, official. My name on court documents, my voice about to be heard by people who had the power to make things right. Your Honor, Archer began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. We're here today because substantial questions have arisen regarding the Ellington state. Questions about undue influence,
about documents that may have been altered, about a pattern of manipulation that spans years. Isolde's attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, rose immediately. Your Honor, this is nothing more than the bitter complaints of a divorced woman who can't accept that her ex-husband moved on. Mrs. Hartwell is attempting to use this court to relitigate a marriage that ended years ago. The words stung, but I'd expected them. This was exactly how they'd try to paint me. The crazy ex-wife, the woman who couldn't let go. But Archer was ready. If these were the complaints of a bitter ex-wife, Your Honor, they wouldn't be supported by bank records showing attempted unauthorized transfers. They wouldn't be corroborated by medical professionals who treated Mr. Ellington in his final months. And they certainly wouldn't align with the testimony we're prepared to present today. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. My heart hammered against my ribs. As he approached the bench, Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mrs. Isolde Ellington, acting as Mr. Ellington's private nurse, had unprecedented access to his finances, his medications, and his daily routine. We have evidence of 3 separate attempts to move substantial sums from accounts specifically designated for Mrs. Hartwell, and we have testimony from medical staff who witnessed concerning interactions between the defendant and the deceased. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Isolde's perfect composure cracked for just a moment. I saw her lean forward, whispering urgently to her attorney, her manicured nails clicking against the table like nervous insects. Furthermore, Archer continued, we have reason to believe that Mr. Ellington became suspicious of the defendant's motives in his final weeks. He took steps to protect his assets, steps that the defendant has been systematically trying to undo since his death. That's when Isolde's attorney played his trump card. Your Honor, the defense would like to present a recently discovered codicil to Mr. Ellington's will. This document, signed just days before his death, specifically revokes any bequests to his former wife. My stomach dropped like a stone. A codicil? How was that possible? The attorney approached the bench with a manila folder, his expression smug with satisfaction. This document was discovered among Mr. Ellington's private papers just this week. It clearly states his final intentions regarding his estate. I gripped Archer's arm, panic rising in my throat. Had we come this far only to be defeated by some last-minute document? But Archer remained calm, too calm. Your Honor, we'd like to request immediate authentication of this alleged codicil. Given the timing of its discovery and the substantial financial interests at stake, I believe verification is warranted. Granted, the judge said. Court will recess for 1 hour while the document is examined. During the break, I paced the courthouse hallway like a caged animal. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept replaying Isolde's attorney's words, recently discovered codicil, signed just days before his death. It's fake, Archer said firmly. It has to be. The timing is too convenient, the discovery too coincidental. But what if it's not? What if Cyrus really did change his mind at the last minute? Archer studied my face with those sharp gray eyes. Do you believe that? After everything we've uncovered about her, after all the evidence of manipulation and fraud? I thought about it. Really thought about it. About the Cyrus I'd known for 15 years. The man who'd been methodical and careful about everything, especially legal documents. Would he really have made such a dramatic change without telling anyone? No, I said finally. He wouldn't have done it that way. Then we fight. When court resumed, the handwriting expert delivered the verdict I had been praying for. Your Honor, while the signature appears genuine at first glance, closer examination reveals several inconsistencies. The pen pressure is uneven, suggesting the signature may have been traced. More importantly, the paper stock doesn't match other documents in Mr. Ellington's files from that time period. Isolde's face went white. Not pale, white, like someone had drained all the blood from her body. Furthermore, the expert continued, there are signs that this document was artificially aged. The ink composition is consistent with modern ballpoint pens, not the fountain pen Mr. Ellington typically used for legal documents. The courtroom erupted. Gasps from the gallery, urgent whispers between attorneys, the sharp rap of the judge's gavel calling for order.
But I only had eyes for Isolde. She was unraveling in real time, her perfect composure cracking like ice under pressure. Her hands shook as she reached for her water glass, and when she tried to drink, I could see the liquid trembling. "Your Honor," Archer said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "this attempted submission of fraudulent documents represents not just contempt of court, but potential criminal fraud. We request that the court—" "Enough!" The voice that cut through the courtroom wasn't the judge's. It was Isolde's. She'd risen from her chair, her face flushed with fury, her careful mask finally completely shattered. Her attorney was frantically trying to get her to sit down, but she shook him off. "You want the truth? Fine. He was a pathetic old man who was dying anyway. He had months, maybe weeks left. I gave him comfort, companionship, care that his precious ex-wife never bothered to provide." Her attorney was frantically trying to get her to sit down, but she shook him off. "I earned every penny of that money. I listened to his complaints. I managed his medications. I held his hand while he cried about his failures. And yes, I tried to protect what was rightfully mine from a bitter woman who abandoned him the moment things got difficult." The judge was hammering his gavel, calling for order, but Isolde wasn't finished. "She wants to paint me as some kind of predator? I was the only one who cared about him in the end, the only one who was there." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, but my voice clear. "You were there because you were paid to be there, because you saw opportunity in a sick, lonely man." The courtroom held its breath. "I was there because I loved him. For 15 years, through everything. And when he needed me most, when he figured out what you really were, he found a way to protect me, even from the grave." Isolde's eyes blazed with hatred. "You self-righteous—" "That's enough," the judge said firmly. "Mrs. Ellington, sit down immediately or you'll be held in contempt." But the damage was done. Everyone in that courtroom had seen behind the mask, had witnessed the rage, the sense of entitlement, the complete lack of genuine grief for the man she claimed to love. The trustees who had supported her, who had nodded politely at her widow act, now sat in uncomfortable silence. I could see them distancing themselves, their allegiances shifting like sand. When the judge finally called for order and the session ended, I knew we'd won something more than just a legal victory. We'd exposed the truth. But as I walked down those courthouse steps, Archer beside me and the late afternoon sun warming my face, I realized something that chilled me despite the heat. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because women like Isolde, women who'd killed once for money and power, don't just give up when their first plan fails. They adapt. They evolve. And they strike back harder than before. I left the courthouse that evening feeling empty. Not defeated exactly. We'd won. The fraudulent codicil was exposed. Isolde's mask had been ripped away in front of everyone who mattered, and the trustees were already distancing themselves from her like she had some contagious disease. But victory felt strangely hollow. The city hummed around me as I walked to my car. Traffic, voices, the normal sounds of people going about their lives while mine had just been turned upside down again. But this time, it was different. This time, I was the one holding the cards. Archer fell into step beside me, his briefcase lighter now that we'd unloaded all our evidence in court. He said, "This isn't the end. There'll be appeals, more hearings. She won't go quietly." I nodded. I'd expected as much. Women like Isolde don't just fold when their first plan fails. But today was important.
Today, everyone saw who she really is. That much was true. The perfect widow act was over. The polished facade had cracked wide open in front of everyone who mattered. Whatever social standing she'd built, whatever connections she'd cultivated, all of that was gone now. Back at my house, I made tea and sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole nightmare started with that first threatening envelope. The silence felt different now. Not oppressive, but peaceful, maybe. Like I could finally breathe without looking over my shoulder. My phone had been buzzing all afternoon, messages from old friends who'd seen the news coverage, clients calling to apologize for doubting me, even a few reporters wanting to hear my side of the story. But I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. The next morning brought confirmation of what I'd suspected. Margaret from the bank called personally to let me know that all restrictions on my accounts had been lifted. The $2.7 million Cyrus had left me was officially, legally mine. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, her voice warm with something that might be respect, "I want you to know what you did took courage. A lot of people would have walked away. Maybe. But walking away had never really been an option, had it? Not once I knew the truth. The money felt surreal. I'd gone from scraping by on design commissions to having more wealth than I'd ever imagined. It should have been exciting, liberating. Instead, it just felt heavy, like a responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready for. That afternoon, I drove past the Ellington estate. I don't know why. Some morbid curiosity, maybe. Or closure. The house looked different somehow. Smaller, less imposing. The windows were dark, and there was a for sale sign planted in the perfectly manicured lawn. I sold it was cutting her losses, apparently. Running before the criminal investigation that was surely coming could catch up with her. Smart woman. Evil, but smart. I didn't stop. Just drove past slowly, taking one last look at the place that had haunted my dreams for months. It was just a house now. The expensive brick and mortar, nothing more. The real victory wasn't the money, I realized. It was getting my life back, my dignity, my right to exist in this city without shame or fear. That evening, I finally felt ready to call some people back. Old friends who'd reached out, clients who wanted to apologize. It felt good to hear friendly voices again, to be welcomed back into the world I thought I'd lost forever. But as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang one more time. Unknown number. My finger hesitated over the screen. Hello? Silence. Then a voice I didn't recognize. Low, steady, completely calm. You think ISOD was your only enemy? You've woken others. Be ready. The line went dead. I stood there in my bedroom, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. The house suddenly felt too quiet, too exposed. All the security I'd thought I'd won, all the peace I'd finally found, it was an illusion. ISOD might be finished, her reputation destroyed, and her plans exposed, but there were others. Other people who'd benefited from keeping Cyrus's true intentions buried. Other players in a game I was only beginning to understand. I thought about calling Archer, calling the police, calling someone who could help. But what would I say? That I'd gotten a vague, threatening phone call? That I felt watched again? Instead, I double-checked my locks, closed all the curtains, and sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. The money was mine now. The legal battle was won. But the war was just beginning. What would you have done in my place? Leave your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if this helped you feel less alone, consider subscribing. I'll be back with the proof that changed everything. Because what I found in Cyrus's safety deposit box the next morning, what had been waiting there all along, protected by locks and legal documents I'd never known existed, that's when I realized this story was bigger than just me and ISOD. much, much bigger.